This is a download from the BBC. To find out more and for our terms of use, please go to bbc.co.uk. Hello. There's no doubt about the story of the week, the Murdoch meltdown. But have BBC News programmes gone overboard in their coverage of it?
It is not of the same order of importance as the worst drought in 60 years in East Africa, the ongoing conflicts in the Middle East. It's somewhat ironic that the story focuses around the news of the world, when, in fact, that's just what we haven't had for last week.
The Murdoch meltdown may be why you haven't heard much about the BBC's annual report, which was published earlier this week. The corporation points out that the BBC's overall talent costs, do they include my fees, dropped by £9 million, while its critics in the press respond by saying that more people than ever, 274, earn more than £100,000. That certainly does not include me. And if the pictures are so much better on the radio, why are so many networks trying to get their presenters on screen, if not on TV?
Yeah, I'm going to lose my bishop if I don't take your pawn, so I'm going to take a pawn. Yep, and I'm grabbing. Oh no, oh no, oh no, I would never have spotted that. Your bishop has taken one of my pawns and left my whole strategy in complete tatters.
Oh, Evan Davis, who has kindly made a video of himself playing Grandmaster Nigel Short, which you can watch on the Today website. I'll also give you details of the resurrection of my screen career later in the programme. But first, this has been the sort of week that BBC News editors dream of when they're spoilt for choice. There's economic mayhem in southern Europe, stalemate in Washington over the US deficit, rocketing energy prices in the UK, not to mention a humanitarian tragedy of biblical proportions developing in Eastern Africa. Some of you wish you'd been able to hear a bit more about all those varied and important issues. Ben Cooper tweeted to say, B-Sky B bid over. Great. Can we now move on to real news, please, like the situation in East Africa?
Kevin Jones from Norwich. The Somalian woman watching her poor child starve to death might wonder at our warped priorities. Each one of those children has a name and a life story, just as Millie Dowler had. If the BBC News teams were to apply a quarter of the energy they expend scalp hunting the News International players towards instead heightening awareness of the drought in East Africa, then they would set an example of decent journalism. But it would obviously be less fun.
My name's Anne Woodhouse. I live in the middle of Dorset and I listen to the radio quite a lot, but have been recently getting more and more fed up with, it seems to me, one subject alone. There are many, many more important things that you could talk about.
Of course, there's no doubt that for all journalists, the Murdoch saga is obsessively interesting. But have those events been given undue prominence and squeezed out other important stories? Mary Hockaday is in charge of around 1,000 staff as the head of the BBC's newsroom. I asked her if her journalists had got the balance right.
It has been an extraordinary week or so, and you're absolutely right, it has come to dominate the news agenda. To be honest, I don't think any of us would have thought, 9-10 days ago that we were facing more than a week of a story unravelling before us. There have been days where I've come in the morning and thought, you know what, today might be a day where this story slips a bit down the agenda, and then yet more revelations or really big developments have emerged through the day.
Well, that's a strong argument, of course, for doing it every day. But whether you do it first and the length at which you do it are the issues perhaps which concern our audience. And they say, as you know, look, there's Somalia, there are significant problems in the economy, there's a worry about gas prices going up. And yes, you will have touched on all these stories, but the amount of time you have given them is limited by the fact, very limited by the amount of time you've given day after day to the News International story.
I mean, you're right, we have touched on all those stories, more than touched in many cases, but just for a moment, let's stay with this story, which in some ways did begin as a media story. But very, very quickly it has become so much more than that. It has become a story about our political class. It's become a story that's drawn the police into it. It's become a story not just about the media in terms of journalistic practice, but the media as a big business sector in this country and also internationally.
But again, that's an argument for its importance, but not for its dominance. And this is what people are getting back. You cannot honestly say that you can put the affairs of Rupert Murdoch side by side with potentially the biggest drought in Africa for 50 years.
The BBC, of course, BBC News, we were one of the first news organisations to even spot and start reporting on the drought. Will Ross was there weeks ago. Ben Brown has been there since. We have, I would argue, on that story, led with it and been very much part of bringing it to people's attentions, whether that's on Radio 4 or across all our news output.
But you see, some of our listeners think there's another thing going on here. It's not just journalists' obsession with themselves. There is the fact that lots of people in the BBC are really delighted to see Murdoch taken down, if not one peg, two. Isn't there a bit of schadenfreude, I suppose you'd call it?
We have a number of ways of having a sense of what our audience thinks of our coverage. And actually, this programme or emails or letters to our various programmes and outputs is one thing. But we do also do some more systematic audience research, if you like, on a kind of constant basis around big stories in particular, and we're always asking the same question about whichever story it is. So are people satisfied? Do they trust us? Do they generally regard the amount that we've done as right? Are there any particular concerns? On this one, that tracking has told us that actually the judgment of the audience is very high in terms of trusting us, wanting to come to us for this story, and also overall given us, again, a high rating compared to some other stories about the amount of coverage we've done.
But you wouldn't deny that there's some loathing of Rupert Murdoch and what he stands for in the BBC. I've certainly heard it. I can't tell you how widespread it is, but it's there, isn't it?
Can you point to it on air? What I'm interested in is our coverage and whether it stands as impartial coverage, and I would hold that it does. I would ask Radio 4 listeners not to confuse the sense of the drama of the story and the sense of new developments unfolding every day and the sense of some of our specialists' knowledge and determination and kind of passion to report and explain this story. Don't confuse that for somehow some sort of glee at what is happening. The story has energy and drama, but that is not the same as what you're talking about.
Now, there's another side to the argument, of course, of bias. There are some who think you're anti-Murdoch. There are others who say, Robert Peston seems to be awfully close to News International, isn't he? And they've seen odd bits in the paper and reports to him going to parties with Rebecca Brooks or whatever. And some people have suggested that he's releasing information as it suits News International. Any truth to that?
What Robert Peston's job is to know what's going on. Robert has a wide range of contacts right across business, including the media business, and of course he's been drawing on those right across the board to tell this story. We are blessed in the BBC to have a team of strong editors and specialists who are able to come at this story and report it for Radio 4 audiences from all angles.
Mary Hockaday, head of the BBC's newsroom. In other news this week, Gwyneth Williams, the Radio 4 controller, has taken her network by the scruff of its well-scrubbed neck and given it a good shaking. In fact, she's produced the biggest programme shake-up on 4 since the advent of James Boyle, MacBurt, in the late 1990s. This week's announcements left on the ropes, and Radio 4 with no choice. They, along with Taking a Stand, are being axed to make way for The Life Scientific, in which Jim Al-Khalili will talk about the work of contemporary scientists. Inevitably, such change is controversial. John Shearer thinks that the 3 programmes that are for the chop are among the most interesting and enjoyable programmes in the output. Not for much longer, John. Jan Ray also has mixed feelings.
I'm very sorry that you're changing Tuesdays mornings on the ropes and the choice. I like listening to programmes that are quite debatey and give one a moral viewpoint on situations in life. I'm looking forward to The Life Scientific. I hated science at school, but I have enjoyed The Infinite Monkey Cage, so I'm prepared to listen and enjoy.
Also, as we've heard, for the first time, The World at One gets extended from 30 to 45 minutes. And short stories will be cut to 1 a week on Radio 4. Alex, Dizzy Gizzy and Meg Crane posted their reactions to these seismic events on the Radio 4 blog.
I'm a bit surprised that afternoon reading has been cut back. Surely the production costs must be lower than almost any other output on the station. I would have thought that in these times that anything that people enjoy that offers real value for money would be given bigger priority.
I'm really pleased to hear about the extension of World at One. It's ridiculous to have 3 hours of yesterday's news in today and only half an hour for breaking news at lunchtime.
I don't have any problem with change as such, but this is in the wrong direction. There are hundreds of hours of news and current affairs coverage available every hour of the day somewhere on the radio or TV. But now that we can all get the World Service on digital radio, Radio 4 should think seriously about providing fewer hours of news coverage, not more.
Well, you'll have the chance to put more of your thoughts and questions to Gwyneth Williams the week after next on Feedback, so please let me know now what you'd like me to ask her. Now, would you enjoy hearing this more if you could see it as well?
Are you ready? Here we go.
Yep, here we go.
Ready? There we are. Yep. So now...
Are you really light?
If I hold that...
You hold that. I've got a great technique. There you go.
There we go.
Just in case it's not clear from the sound alone, you're listening to Radio 1's Matt Edmondson, who is being given a piggyback by singer Ollie Murs.
Hello.
Now, the idea of this interview is the longer you can keep me on the back, the more time we get to chat about you and your life.
Amazing.
So you're on tour at the moment. How's that going?
UK tour is going really, really well.
Piggyback Chat is a regular feature of Matt's show, and while you can hear the increasingly breathless interviews in the usual way on the wireless, you can also watch them on the Radio 1 website. Increasingly, radio is being, to use an inelegant word, visualised, and each network is going about it slightly differently. Presenter Victoria Derbyshire and her editor Louisa Compton kindly agreed to show me how it works on 5 Live.
This is Studio 4, S4 in Television Centre. We're only here for a few more months, of course.
Oh, the carpet's so thick. Gosh, you don't need to have shoes on.
Don't lie to our listeners.
Yes.
So, this is quite a small studio. Behind my right shoulder are 3 cameras, small unobtrusive cameras that focus on the various guest microphones.
Right.
In the other corner is a camera that focuses on me, so when I speak, it cuts to my face.
Automatically?
Yes. It does not need human beings to work it.
Louisa, talk me through this morning's programme. What have you set up and why does the visualisation of this, if you like, enhance the experience?
Every day is different, and today we haven't got many guests in the studio, so today people who are watching it online will be able to see Victoria, they'll be able to see the newsreaders coming in and out, sports presenters, travel presenters. On other days we've got plenty of guests in the studio, Beverly Knight, Chipmunk. Tomorrow we've got one of the most senior divorce judges coming in.
What does it matter to the audience? Do you get any feedback from people who say, you know, it really was good to be able to see the person you're talking to?
Yes. I think what really changed things in terms of news and current affairs programmes was the general election last year. We did various election outside broadcasts around the country featuring top politicians and audiences of 300 voters. And we streamed our debate from Luton on immigration via the 5 Live website.
I fundamentally reject the arrogant, disruptive presence that the BNP has been in this town in the last year.
Hi, this is Rhys and Gwent. I felt that the pictures gave much more clarity and a much more balanced view of what was going on in the room, rather than just listening to the audio. Up until that point, I was rather apathetic with, you know, it's going to be the same old thing, nothing's going to get sorted out. And that particular broadcast, it changed my mind.
289,000 people watched that on a Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock. An election debate.
How expensive is this? Is this a luxury, this visualisation?
I think it costs about £6,000 to install a camera in the studio, and then the cost of maintaining it on a day-to-day basis is virtually nothing.
Of course, the cost of an outside broadcast like the one from Luton would not be nothing, but it's still considerably cheaper than TV. Nigel Smith is the head of Interactive at 5 Live. He's keen to stress that visualisation is about bringing in a new audience, not alienating the current one.
I think if you listen to 5 Live, you will never get the sense of I'm missing out by not being able to watch the programme. I think what visualisation does is add something, and by filming things in the studio and then being able to put them on YouTube, we'll have a far greater success at getting that content to a wider audience.
Obviously one remembers the Jeremy Vine programme where Gordon Brown put his head in his hands when he realised that the tape of the recording with this woman during the election, which deeply embarrassed him, was actually going to be played.
Can I ask you about a voter you've just met apparently on your way to us? This is a woman called Gillian Duffy who I think was just questioning you about tuition fees and a couple of other things. And as you went away, a microphone picked you up saying that was a very bigoted woman. Is that what you said?
I apologise if I've said anything like that.
I think there were probably a lot of people who saw that clip who had never ever heard Jeremy Vine on the radio and actually could well tune into that programme thanks to that interview.
Nigel Smith. But some might say that in all this excitement, the BBC is rather missing the point about radio. You don't have to look at it, and the pictures are better.
Well, my name's Nigel Robson. I kind of feel TV is something I sit down to watch in the evening, perhaps, whereas radio is something I have on in the background as I actually get on with other things that you do in life throughout the day. I sometimes listen to Radio 4 Play, for instance, in the afternoon. You know precisely what those people look like in your mind. Now, the reality is they're probably very different.
Indeed. Benjamin Chesterton insists that radio is not diminished by this development. He's the director of the production company Duck Rabbit, which makes radio documentaries and what he calls photo films, built out of audio and images.
Radio is radio, it has its place, and it goes out on the airwaves. And once you take the audio and you combine it with still images, it becomes something completely and utterly new. For the World Service, we produced a series this year called Open Eye, where we took a documentary photographer, or two of them, and we followed them on their journey as they told their story. The first one was with a photographer called Dalia Hamisi, and she's been telling the stories of the families who lost people to enforced kidnapping during the Lebanese Civil War. And there's about 17,000 of them.
They took one of my sons before he was dressed. He was in his pyjamas, so I took his shirt. The militant got on the truck and kicked my son.
You need to see these women's faces. You need to be able to stare into their eyes. So we're able to complement that very, very powerful audio also with her photographs.
Hello, my name's Richard and I'm from Dorset, and I watch Kermode and Mail online. To hear Mark Kermode and to see him progressively getting more and more wound up as he demolishes some useless piece of rubbish is tremendously entertaining.
Oh, aren't these guys drinking beer and doing stuff with strippers? Aren't they really interesting? No, they're not interesting. They're just... Did you ever hang out with them? Did you ever go to a bachelor party? Have you ever been to a bachelor party? Well, is that the same as a stag night?
But the main reason why I watch it is to see the professionalism and the talents of the other presenter, Simon Mayo. It's a fascinating insight into the way radio works.
On digital and online. This is BBC Radio 5 Live. Good morning, it's 10 o'clock Tuesday.
Louisa, has your behaviour had to improve as a result of this? Because I've met BBC producers or editors, in fact it's been done to me in a programme, where somebody's come in, put their hands around my neck because they didn't think I was doing a particular good job. That was on the Moral Maze, by the way. Do you have to modify your behaviour once you know the cameras are on?
Well, I haven't put my hands around Victoria's neck yet, but there's still time.
Louisa, is this true? I'm exactly the same.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whether the cameras are on or off. So I'm afraid you will see raised eyebrows, rolling eyes to heaven, sometimes thumbs up, sometimes thumbs down. You know, you cannot argue against transparency. They can see exactly what we're doing, that we are in real time interviewing real people live on the radio.
The Divine Miss Derbyshire and colleagues, and you can see some of the examples that Benjamin Chesterton was talking about on my blog. Follow the links from our website. And if you want to contact me about anything you've heard or seen on the radio this week, please do. Although I must apologise to this caller.
My name is Simon Coombe. I'm somewhat astonished that Roger Bolton's not sitting there all the time, waiting to take your calls personally. It's a poor show.
Sorry, Simon. I must have popped out for a cappuccino. If it happens again, please leave me a message. The telephone number is 03 333 444 544. Standard landline charges apply, but it could cost more on some mobile networks. You can write to Feedback, PO Box 67234, London SE1 P4AX. Or you can email feedback@bbc.co.uk, and in the spirit of visualisation of radio, you can see me reading out those details via a link from my blog. And no, it's not a wig. Now, fasten your seatbelts, put your seats in an upright position, and prepare for takeoff.
Happy Burling Day to us, happy Burling Day to us, happy Burling Day, dear Martin, Douglas and Arthur. All right, Arthur, that'll do. Happy Burling Day to us, Arthur. Sorry, I just love Burling Day, don't you?
Cabin pressure is set in the world of MJN Air, a one-plane charter airline with just 2 pilots. The latest series of this Radio 4 comedy started at the beginning of the month. A lot of you were looking forward to it, not least because it stars that brilliant actor Roger Allam, who has been in particularly fruity form. But some of you were underwhelmed. Had something changed? Malcolm Alsop and Kevin Jones are among a number of you who got in touch making the same point.
I was looking forward to the new series of Cabin Pressure, but what have they done to it? Adding a studio audience has ruined what was a great comedy series. The performances are now totally aimed at generating knee-jerk laughs from a braying studio audience. And because of this, the natural rhythms of the programme have been completely lost. Cabin Pressure, rest in peace.
Ah, Douglas, nice and early for Burling Day, I see.
Ah, Carolyn, likewise.
I'm Dave Schofield. I live in Devon. I thought the last two series were brilliant. I have to say I'm a little bit disappointed this time. The programme itself seems good, but the presentation seems to have changed. The laughing just seems much more intrusive.
1, I win every time. 2, this is a time. 3, I will win this time.
Oh, is this about the whiskey? Well, we asked the producer, David Tyler, if listeners were hearing things, but he insisted that absolutely nothing had changed. I quote, neither in the way we record it, nor in the way we edit it. He says, I'm genuinely sorry that a few listeners aren't enjoying it as much. I would offer them some Air Miles vouchers with MJN Air, but that probably wouldn't help. So it's all a bit of a puzzle. But if Cabin Pressure is not for you, there are to be more comedies on Radio 4 in the autumn as a result of the controller's recent changes, which include the axing of Americana. The person responsible for finding those extra shows and ensuring that they do indeed make us laugh, or at least chuckle, is Caroline Raphael, the commissioning editor for comedy and entertainment at Radio 4. I asked her if any Radio 4 comedies were recorded without an audience.
Yes, quite a few of them. For example, Ed Reardon's Week, which is enormously successful, run for many series, is not in front of an audience. And yet in the same slot, another show like Claire in the Community does.
So at what stage in the production process do you decide this comedy would be helped by an audience, this one would not?
Actually, it's led by the writing. It's a very different way of writing for an audience. And therefore, you can't make a decision right at the end of the writing process and go, oh, I know what, let's stick it in front of an audience. It almost certainly won't work. If you decide you're going to write for a studio audience, then the amount of jokes, literally per minute, need to be really high. You only know there's an audience there if you hear them. And if they disappeared for long periods of time, then you might wonder, is this funny anymore? What's going on? The shows that have more texture and may actually need more contemplative moments or more introspective moments aren't all about chasing one joke after another. You'd probably do those in the studio. They wouldn't really work very well in front of a studio audience.
Does that mean that the ones that do have a studio audience are a little coarser?
I wouldn't use that word, but I think they're more direct, they're more instant. You go for the emotion, you go for the laugh, and goodness me, you go for it. And then, of course, as a performer, having got the laugh, then you build and you go for the next one and the next one and the next one. But it's got to be there in the writing. If it's not there in the writing, you can be the most fabulous comic actor ever, and you still won't get the laugh.
Well, I suppose the studio audience is, if you like, part of the performance, and you certainly want them to laugh. So how do you warm them up so that the first joke is well received?
Every producer has their own way of doing it. Sometimes the producers will do it themselves, and if you go and see a lot of shows produced by the same producer, you might just get to know the jokes. Sometimes with things like The Now Show, News Quiz, and so on, which have a kind of sort of standard regular panel, they will do the warm-up themselves. Pretty sure something like Just a Minute, although that's a panel show, doesn't have a warm-up. Nicholas just talks to the audience and they warm to him, and that's it. There is another reason for warming up an audience, which is not just about making sure they laugh and making sure that they know that they're allowed to laugh, but for the people who are actually recording the show, they actually need to know what that audience sounds like. And every group of people, albeit in the same venue, may sound slightly different. So they're literally setting levels and making sure that they've got the balance right between what's being said on stage and what the audience are doing. The added danger in radio are the little looks, the little asides, somebody doing something a bit silly with their body language. And let's be honest, we've all heard moments on radio, we'll put our hands up to this, where you go, I don't know what they're laughing at, but X has obviously just done something hysterical. But very often, if they can, producers might cut that out because it's not fair on the audience at home.
And what about canned laughter? Is it banned?
We just don't use it. We don't have it.
Do you use it to supplement an audience? If when you're listening to a programme before it goes out, you're a bit disappointed with the audience reaction, do you supplement the laughter of the audience with laughter from other programmes?
We would never ever take laughter from another programme. It wouldn't sound the same. I mean, anybody who understands about acoustics, it just won't match. Hand on heart, will a producer from time to time take laughter from that show and possibly bump up a moment? And also, dare I say, use it if there's been a retake, which may have been a script turn or something goes wrong or you have to make a cut. But it will always be from that audience.
Well, can I ask you now about the changes just announced by the tempted to say new controller of Radio 4, which has been here for about 10 months anyway, her first significant changes, and they include, seems to be, more comedy, certainly on Sunday night. Can you tell us about these Sunday night comedies?
There is a new sketch show written by and starring John Finnemore, who people may know from the Now Show. They may also know from Cabin Pressure, in which he plays the dimwit steward and is also the writer of that. We have 2 panel shows. A new show with Sue Perkins, which takes moral dilemmas, gets a panel to discuss them in hopefully a witty, interesting and hilarious way as possible, and that's called It's Debatable. It's Your Round, which listeners have already heard and has recently been repeated. That will come back for its second series starting on Sunday. And we will repeat the new Rory Bremner satirical show, which is called Tonight, will be at 11 o'clock in the evening on a Thursday, and it will get a Sunday repeat, so it'll still be topical.
My thanks to Caroline Raphael, one of whose jobs is to dispel those Sunday night blues. Well, that's about it for this week. The BBC Proms start this weekend, and this year all 90 concerts are being broadcast in high definition. Next week I'll be trying to get a clearer picture of how that will work on the radio. And as I mentioned the week after, I'll be talking to the controller of Radio 4. I expect she hopes all her listeners are as happy as Fiona Nivola.
As I was driving home this morning, I had roughly 2.5 hours in the car. And it just struck me as I was listening how unbelievably excellent the programs were. This has been going on in my life for 30 years, and I take it completely for granted that I can press a button and be in touch with these formidable people who might be John Humphreys, it might be Edward Sturton, it might be the lovely Eddie Mayer, it might be Jenny Murray, it might be Libby, it might be, I can't think of any more names at the moment.
I can.
And there they are, week in, week out. And I just thought, when you get home, the first thing you're going to do is thank Radio 4. So I did.
One happy customer, Fiona Nivola. From one reasonably happy presenter, goodbye.
Deep tatters.
Oh, Evan. Evan Davis, who has kindly made a video of himself playing Grandmaster Nigel Short, which you can watch on the Today website. I'll also give you details of the resurrection of my screen career later in the programme. But first, this has been the sort of week that BBC News editors dream of when they're spoilt for choice. There's economic mayhem in southern Europe, stalemate in Washington over the US deficit, rocketing energy prices in the UK, not to mention a humanitarian tragedy of biblical proportions developing in Eastern Africa. Some of you wish you'd been able to hear a bit more about all those varied and important issues. Ben Cooper tweeted to say, B-Sky B bid over. Great. Can we now move on to real news? Please, like the situation in East Africa?
Kevin Jones from Norwich. The Somalian woman watching her poor child starve to death might wonder at our warped priorities. Each one of those children has a name and a life story, just as Millie Dowler had. If the BBC News teams were to apply a quarter of the energy they expend scalp hunting the News International players towards instead heightening awareness of the drought in East Africa, then they would set an example of decent journalism. But it would obviously be less fun.
My name's Anne Woodhouse. I live in the middle of Dorset, and I listen to the radio quite a lot, but have been recently getting more and more fed up with, it seems to me, one subject alone. There are many, many more important things that you could talk about.
Of course, there's no doubt that for all journalists, the Murdoch saga is obsessively interesting. But have those events been given undue prominence and squeezed out other important stories? Mary Hockaday is in charge of around 1,000 staff as the head of the BBC's newsroom. I asked her if her journalists had got the balance right.
It has been an extraordinary week or so.
The corporation points out that the BBC's overall talent costs, do they include my fees, dropped by £9 million, while its critics in the press respond by saying that more people than ever, 274, earn more than £100,000. That certainly does not include me. And if the pictures are so much better on the radio, why are so many networks trying to get their presenters on screen, if not on TV?
Yeah, I'm going to lose my bishop if I don't take your pawn, so I'm going to take a pawn. Yep, and I'm grabbing. Oh no, oh no, oh no, I would never have spotted that. Your bishop has taken one of my pawns and left my whole strategy incomplete.
This is a download from the BBC. To find out more and for our terms of use, please go to bbc.co.uk. Hello. There's no doubt about the story of the week, the Murdoch meltdown. But have BBC News programmes gone overboard in their coverage of it?
It is not of the same order of importance as the worst drought in 60 years in East Africa, the ongoing conflicts in the Middle East. It's somewhat ironic that the story focuses around the news of the world, when, in fact, that's just what we haven't had for last week.
The Murdoch meltdown may be why you haven't heard much about the BBC's annual report, which was published earlier this week.